The Stone Zone with legendary Republican strategist and political icon and pundit Roger Stone. Stone has served as a senior campaign aide to 3 Republican presidents. He is a New York Times best-selling author and a longtime friend and advisor of President Donald Trump. As an outspoken libertarian, Stone has appeared on thousands of broadcasts, spoken at countless venues, and lectured before the prestigious Oxford Political Union and the Cambridge Union Society. Due to his 4+ decades in the political and cultural arena, Stone has become a pop culture icon. And now, here's your host, Roger Stone.
Welcome, I'm Roger Stone, and yes, you are back in the Stone Zone. Like most Americans, a majority of Americans, we're literally counting the days before Donald Trump becomes president and our nation is saved. You're going to see such a dramatic change in the direction of this country in virtually every area and segment of the country and in all of the country's endeavors. Indeed, it's an exciting time to be alive. Of course, the deep state could not let this moment pass, having gotten drubbed in a national election by record margins, having lost every swing state, having seen Donald Trump himself make deep inroads into traditionally Democrat groups of voters such as Jews, Hispanic Americans, African Americans, young people, and so on. While the party itself may be regrouping, but the deep state, which is broader than just the Democrat Party, that conglomeration of burrowed-in bureaucrats within our government, those at the think tanks, those at the defense contractors, those deep in our Justice Department and our intelligence agencies, we should not just assume that they are going to go quietly, because that will not necessarily be the case. Just last week, we had the travesty of Donald Trump being sentenced in a Manhattan courtroom. He chose to do it via video call, I'm happy to say. To help break that down, first let me bring in my co-host, who now has his own new great show on Worldview Tube, Troy Smith, the editor-in-chief of Slingshot.news.
Roger, it's always an honor to be back in the Stone Zone with you again today.
Many thanks. I got up late today, so I am wearing my Make America Italian Again hat. By the way, if you like this hat, you want to get one for yourself, you can go to StoneZONE.com, StoneZONE.com. You can find them in the store there, and we'll get it right out to you. Could be autographed, as this one is, or not. That's up to you. But if you want to get your Make America Italian hat, that's the place to go. All right, Troy, I kind of introduced the subject. It is, of course, the continuing lawfare, perhaps at least temporarily the wind down of the lawfare against President Donald Trump. Here to help us break this down, former Trump impeachment lawyer, and without any question, perhaps the single best criminal defense lawyer and legal strategist in the country today, David Schoen, joins us in the Stone Zone.
Hey, thank you very much for having me.
David, thanks for joining us, particularly on late notice, but, well, your expertise and your wisdom is required. I believe it was on my 77 WABC radio show, but it actually may have been here on the Stone Zone, that you analyzed the situation regarding the end of the so-called hush money trial. It is my understanding, I think generally understood, that the president was in kind of a catch-22 where without an extraordinary change of events, he would require to be sentenced before he could then appeal this travesty of a conviction, this travesty of a case. You argued, I think, quite articulately that he could have tried to get an interlocutory decision regarding the case and thus postponed the sentencing. It looks to me, just looking at Twitter this morning, X, pardon me, this morning, True Social, the left has gotten what they wanted, was simply name calling, simply the ability to say, oh, now he's a convicted felon, kind of like Hunter Biden, pardon me. But David, how do you think this went down? Why do you think it went down? How might it have been done differently? And what will be the ultimate impact on Trump's case?
Listen, they may think that they won the day because he's now called a convicted felon, but they were saying he was a convicted felon before, and the media was trying to say, well, this is just a nice distinction you're trying to draw because he hasn't been sentenced, but he's already a convicted felon. It's going to be a Pyrrhic victory because the decision will be overturned, period. So they better enjoy, if they think it's a victory, better enjoy it now while it lasts, because it will be short-lived. I think President Trump had some decisions to make. One decision he could have made would have been to simply go forward with the sentencing anyway, and so that he can now finally appeal all of the rulings in the case, all of the terrible errors that Judge Merchan made, starting from the allowing this indictment to go forward that never really charged a crime in the case. Remember, what we have here is a statute that under 175.05 in the New York penal law makes it a misdemeanor to make false business record entries. And then it's a felony under 175.10 if you do that to commit or conceal another crime. At no point in this case, from start to finish, was that so-called other crime ever identified. In fact, when it came time to instruct the jury, the prosecution offered the judge 4 alternatives for what the target crime could have been. Anything from so-called election fraud to a tax crime, or 2 others. And the judge said, well, he'll pick 3 of those, and it could be any of them, but he won't require the jury to specify, and he won't require the jury to agree on what the crime was that was actually committed. It's unheard of. It's a classic state and federal constitutional violation. You can't defend against charges like that. They're completely different defenses depending on what the target crime is. And it creates a double jeopardy problem. Let's say he's acquitted on one, and then they come back and raise another theory under the same indictment. So it's flawed from start to finish. The judge never should have been on the case. One issue that the lawyers missed, in my view, I think should have been raised, is the way in which Merchan was selected. Ordinarily, the default in that court is for it to go in the wheel, random selection. Merchan wasn't chosen randomly. Merchan was chosen by the chief administrative judge to sit on this case, along with the other Trump-related cases, the Bannon case, the Trump Organization case. It certainly wasn't because he was competent. So they try to claim that, well, it's a complicated case and he's familiar with the issues. That's not it. So a long time ago, in the early 2000s, New York City Criminal Defense Lawyers Association wrote a letter opposing the practice they have in that court, and that court alone, the New York County District Attorney's Office. And that practice was for the DA to handpick a judge for grand jury proceedings to keep that judge on the case for the rest of the trial. It was challenged in federal court, and the federal court said, listen, on a collateral review, we're not going to address this. But if this issue were raised on direct appeal, we think there could be a real constitutional issue there. So the prosecution claimed that they stopped that practice, but we see it again in this case. Merchan was handpicked for this case, never should have been. And then, of course, they're the overwhelming, but the lawyers never raised that issue. I'm sorry about that. I wish they had. I suggested it at the time in an article that I wrote and otherwise. But anyway, then there's the terrible recusal issue. Of course, this judge never should have sat on it based on his daughter's clear conflict of interest, which inures to him because of the substantial financial interest that she had, and she's a close relative, she had in seeing a Trump conviction in this case, and certainly the continued prosecution of Trump. It's the appearance of impropriety, the appearance of a lack of impartiality, clearly, and there's no reason to do it. When you're trying a president of the United States, you should be holier than the Pope, as they say. Anyway, so there's so many answers to this. But yes, you raised the issue earlier of the possibility of an interlocutory appeal. They tried, in a sense, to get a New York court to stay Merchan's actions so that they could appeal the immunity issues, because the immunity issues could have been taken up before there was a full sentencing. It certainly would have been in federal court. An argument that I thought they missed earlier on was an argument that was raised in the dissenting opinion of Justice Wood in a New York Court of Appeals case from 2017. And there he said, Justice Wood said that there is a concept of when a federal right is at issue, a federal right like the federal right to immunity here, then the federal rules ought to apply. And if the federal rules applied here, then there would be an automatic stay and you'd get to take an interlocutory appeal of the immunity issue. There's a United States Supreme Court case called Johnson versus Fankel that said you don't have an automatic right to that in every state, but here's a New York State judge on the Court of Appeals, the highest court, suggesting that there is such a right. So I thought that should have been pursued. But listen, time was, running fast. They got 4 votes at the Supreme Court, United States Supreme Court, to stop the case. Last thing I want to say about this is I thought that another way this could have been brought, rather than focusing just on the transition period. Their argument was this interferes with the president-elect during the transition period. And that's true, and it shouldn't be permitted. Under the Presidential Transition Act, there are very important interests here that should have been, that shouldn't be distracted from. However, I thought that the focus should have been on the impact allowing this case to go forward has on the presidency itself in just, a few days from now. Because now what happens is President Trump has to take a full appeal of all of these issues. And that's exactly the kind of stigma with this convicted felon business and distraction with taking a full appeal that the United States Justice Department in their 2000 OLC, Office of Legal Counsel opinion said, that's the reason we don't permit an indictment or the criminal process at all to carry on during a presidency. Now, you could say, well, if he had raised that, then they would have put it over 4 years. That's not the only alternative. He could have taken the limited appeal of the immunity, and he could have had a limited waiver of immunity to take the appeal on this thing if he were on the whole entire conviction, if he were forced into it like he is now. Bottom line now is, in my view, President Trump should appeal every issue that arose from Judge Merchan right now, and he will get this case reversed, and that's the end of the case.
David, the U.S. Supreme Court decision surprisingly decided 5-4 to essentially delay the sentencing. Your feelings about that?
Yeah, I thought that the 5th vote should have been there. To me, it's sort of a no-brainer. There was no reason to rush forward with the sentencing in this case, and the alternative was not holding it in abeyance. Holding it in abeyance 4 years would have run afoul of the principles in the OLC opinion, which should apply those same underlying principles to the states, as a very bright law professor has written. There are many issues that require that, including supremacy clause issues and others. So I'm disappointed the 5th vote wasn't there. But I do think that part of the reason was, and they said so in their opinion, is that there's no real authority to take this kind of action during the presidential transition period. And this wasn't such a burden during that period. It's a matter of sitting there and having the sentencing. The burden is on the presidency, and that's what should have been avoided and could have been avoided had the sentencing not gone forward now.
All right. Troy, a question for Counselor Schoen.
Absolutely, sir. It was kind of troubling just to hear you describe the conduct of Juan Merchan kind of all in a line there. And I think most Americans are troubled by his actions during this trial. And wanted to ask you a couple questions. One, do you think in a potential review of this case that Juan Merchan could face kind of discipline for his actions and the way he's conducted himself? And secondly, do you think that his actions, if they're allowed to stay, would allow potentially open the door for trouble down the road on either side of the political aisle with abuses of power by judges in states, both Republican and Democrat?
Great questions also, like Rogers. I'd have to say, answering the second one first, absolutely. I think he set a terrible precedent. I think he turned the ethics rules on their head. The ethics rules are clear. Recusal, disqualification from the case is mandatory when there's a significant or substantial financial interest in the underlying subject matter from a relative of this kind of close nature. There's no question about that in this case. The news articles were voluminous about his daughter's profiting off of the campaign of Kamala Harris and others similarly situated. And there's no possible way that a judge should be expected to overlook that. As for whether he'll be disciplined, I'm not confident in that, because during the course of this case, there was a brief interlocutory appeal of his decision to stay on the case. and the judges allowed him to stay on the case from the appellate division. I think that when there's a full review of this, that has to be a serious issue in which the court engages. His conduct was reprehensible in the case, and he never should have taken it. It taints the entire integrity of the process. So there may be people out there who politically love the idea that Donald Trump was convicted by a jury, but it was a skewed process. What they should love is the idea of a judicial process filled with integrity from start to finish, no matter who the defendant is.
Excellent. David, if we can, let's shift over to the so-called documents case. Now, the documents case was dismissed by Judge Eileen Cannon, and she did so on the basis of her opinion that Jack Smith, the special counsel's appointment, was unconstitutional. Although Andrew Weissman and Norm Eisen and others scoff at this, they're wrong, as they usually are. It's a very legitimate argument. I think it's actually a correct argument. Mr. Smith was never approved to have these sweeping prosecutorial powers by the U.S. Senate. There is no law in place that governs his actions. There's an agreement, essentially an assertion, a decree put forward by the Attorney General. I watched an argument on MSNBC the other day in which one of the talking heads said, well, the law requires Smith to make a report to the Attorney General, who may then release the report or not release the report based on his decision. Really? What law would that be? The special counsel law? The law doesn't exist. The independent counsel law, that's already also been allowed to transpire. Yet it seems that, again, the Supreme Court is allowing this to go forward, where Jack Smith, in an obvious attempt just to embarrass Donald Trump, but in a proceeding in which Trump has no formal way to respond to whatever their fakakta report ends up showing, this seems very unfair to me, and also prejudicial to the other two individuals, Walt Nauta, Mr. D'Olivia, I think it is, who were wrongfully charged with the president. How is all of this going to play out, David?
Right. Well, let me just hit on one of the last points you made, and that is the unfairness of the situation. Think about this. Jack Smith now gets to put out his own narrative with a team of Trump haters, just like the Mueller commission was made up of a team of Trump haters. That's what Jack Smith did in picking his committee, people like J.P. Cooney and others, Molly Gaston, others from D.C. and so-called Public Integrity Unit from a U.S. attorney in D.C. who is one of the ultimate Trump haters. So he gets to put out a report now that's simply their narrative, unchecked and untested. And all through the case, that's what he did. He put out a speaking indictment after the Supreme Court decision in Fisher, which should have thrown out the obstruction charges against President Trump, after the official acts decision in the Trump case before the Supreme Court. He issued a superseding indictment, which he never should have done. And again, it was a speaking indictment with just his untested, uncross-examined narrative about President Trump, at the same time insisting that there's a gag order in place as to President Trump. Now, you want to talk about unfairness. If President Trump had tried to respond to those things, he would have faced severe sanctions from the judge, including possible jail time. That's about as unfair and one-sided as it gets in this system, and it never should have been permitted. As for, his insistence, you made the point, his insistence that he has an obligation to issue a report. Based on Judge Cannon's decision, Jack Smith has no standing. That office has no further standing unless and until the 11th Circuit overturns that decision, and it might. But right now the status is there is no special counsel because it was an unconstitutional appointment under the Appropriations Clause and the Appointments Clause. And ironically, given the dismissal under the Appropriations Clause under Article 1, Section 9, Clause 7 of the Constitution, we're now spending taxpayer money, more appropriations, never appropriated, for Jack Smith to continue on his mission here. So there's a big problem with it. What the law requires, these special counsel regulations, if they applied, require is under 600.8C for Jack Smith to issue a confidential report to the Attorney General after the conclusion of the matter. The matters are not concluded yet. They're ongoing. The documents case is ongoing. Let him dismiss the case against Nauta and de Oliveira, but he hasn't. So his answer now to the Supreme Court was, to the 11th Circuit rather, was, well, I'll only issue the first report. That doesn't mention the documents case. We won't issue the second report yet, except we will give it to certain congressmen and senators. That's the same as issuing the report publicly, to the prejudice of them. Judge Cannon was right to put a stay to that because it impacts on the judicial proceedings before her. But now Smith apparently has admitted that even part one, the report that's supposed to be about the DC case, in two places mentions the documents case. So it's not accurate to say it's only about the documents case. But the whole thing is just a farce. It shouldn't be permitted. It's one-sided. It's biased. And people will credit it as if it's coming from the government, just like they credited an unchecked and untested indictment.
It's very interesting. There is pending at the Justice Department a very serious complaint against Jack Smith for his conduct when he was at The Hague in the International Court. Provides an enormous amount of evidence that Mr. Smith may have taken enormous bribes in deciding who and who should not be prosecuted by that court. It's a serious complaint. Obviously, there's been no finding against him, but there's a lot of very strong evidence there. This Justice Department just seeks to pretend it was never filed and just intends to ignore it. I don't know that the next Justice Department is going to handle this the same way. David, if you've never seen the complaint, I'll send it to you. It was put together by a number of people who feel they were victimized by Jack Smith when he was a prosecutor in the International Court in The Hague.
One thing, Roger, we can say for sure is, first of all, that will be investigated and when there is such a complaint. But secondly, he has shown extraordinarily poor judgment at just about every stage of his career. In the John Edwards case, the lawyers met with him for a long time to try to tell him why he shouldn't be prosecuting that case, and they were right. The jury rejected that case. In the Governor McDonnell case, overturned by unanimous Supreme Court, it never should have been brought. So he's shown extremely poor judgment, but it doesn't seem to matter. He keeps repeating the pattern, gets the headlines, and then impugns the character of whoever his targets are.
Yeah, last night I was, unfortunately, I inadvertently flipped on to MSNBC last night, and I saw Andrew Weissman, conceivably the single most corrupt prosecutor in U.S. history. By the way, I understand there's a great documentary in the works on that. And he was about 4 glasses of wine in and bitching that America would be headed into a new era of lawlessness. If you ever want to know what's really going on, just listen to whatever Andrew Weissman has to say and assume the exact opposite. It's Alinsky's rules writ large. Anything they accuse those who support Donald Trump of doing is always exactly what they themselves are doing. And it tickles me the way he continues to point to the Enron case as the gold standard of federal prosecutions, a case in which he was unanimously overturned by the Supreme Court and tongue-lashed by the judge for prosecutorial misconduct. It's as if this never happened. Is it just ironic that the January 6 detainees, many of them were prosecuted using an Enron-generated statute that the Supreme Court later threw out? Whose idea do you think that might have been? Oh, I have a guess. Here's a difficult question, and it is some of the president's supporters, I'm one of them in some cases, believe that there are people in the Biden and Obama administration who committed serious crimes, that the Russian collusion hoax, if one believes the conclusions of the special report put forward by special counsel John Durham, some of them may constitute treason. There's no statute of limitations on the crime of treason, but anyone charged because they acted in a prosecutorial or official role on the basis of political decisions, and in some cases perhaps utilized information or evidence that they knew was fabricated, such as the Steele dossier or the false claim that the Russians hacked the DNC. If they went to trial in the District of Columbia, I can tell you firsthand, given the, shall we say, the quality of the judges there, all of whom are, as Tucker Carlson said, partisans in robes. In my case, the judge might as well have been yet another prosecutor. She ruled for them on everything, ruled for us on nothing, deprived me of my constitutional rights from the beginning, said that I couldn't raise the question of corruption by the special counsel, the Department of Justice, the FBI, or any member of Congress, although the Supreme Court in Kyles v. Whitley held that the legitimacy of an investigation and an indictment is always grounds for defense. Maybe the judge can't read. In any event, as long as any of these prosecutions, if they take place in the District of Columbia, given what we saw in the Sussman case, which I'm still scratching my head because the decision by Durham to charge Sussman is like charging the guy who drove the getaway car for double parking while you let the bank robbers get away. But even in the Sussman case, in which the evidence was overwhelming, Sussman was, of course, acquitted by a partisan judge and a overwhelmingly biased jury. So the Democrats are all wrapped up about retaliation and revenge, which I don't think is what Trump has in mind. I do think his new attorney general does seek to rebalance the scales of justice so that we can return to a single-tier justice system. But as long as those who have perpetrated, in some cases, very serious crimes are tried in the District of Columbia, how could we expect justice? And is there any way that these cases, should they be brought, can be tried elsewhere?
Yeah, it's a very sad situation, but the underlying point that you make is one that has to be emphasized over and over again. The lawlessness, to use maybe Andrew Weissman's term, that's reflected in prosecutorial misconduct in case after case for political gain or otherwise is one of the most, I'd say the most dangerous attribute of a criminal justice system that judges permit to go on. We see it so many times, been going on forever, as far as I know. And with respect to Andrew Weissman, all you have to do is look back at the 90s. In my view, the most corrupt prosecution in the history of this country. Defendants like Victor Arena and Michael Sessa and others were prosecuted in the Eastern District by Weissman, John Gleason, and others, using an informant who was committing murders on the street and so on. Look back at the opinion that Judge Sifton, then the chief judge, wrote, specifically singling out Andrew Weissman for having a myopic sense of the ethics that a lawyer has to have. That's back in the 90s. This has been going on with that character forever. He's the single most corrupt, ethically bankrupt prosecutor I've ever encountered. But even now, look ahead, Jack Smith's team. He has this J.P. Cooney, who you know, Roger. But I have a sanctions motion pending against him for a long time now, when he and his team of this Public Integrity Unit went to get a Stored Communications Act order for the emails of a lawyer and other records of a lawyer, and lied to the court, gave the wrong identity of the person whose records they were seeking, and assured the court that this was the proper person, exposing private records of a completely uninvolved person to exposure, exposing them now. It's reprehensible. So I don't know, exactly who did what in any of these prosecutions. I am confident that the Pam Bondi, the incoming Attorney General, will look into these things. And in terms of this payback, what people forget is President Trump had every opportunity in his first administration to seek an investigation and potential prosecution of Hillary Clinton for what she did with her laptop and the destruction of evidence in that case. People were saying, lock her up, lock her up. Had he decided to appeal to those base instincts, he certainly would have pressed for a prosecution, but he didn't. So the only thing we've seen in terms of payback or targeting for political reasons is what the Biden administration has done to President Trump and to some of his associates, and it's reprehensible. And what I'm most shocked about with all of this is that Merrick Garland allowed it to go on. I'm not shocked that his assistant Lisa Monaco did. She's a Weissman acolyte. But when he was a judge, Garland was a terrific judge, I thought, had a case that he handled. And I'm shocked by what we've seen from him. And to me, what epitomizes it was at the end of this administration when he said that executive privilege ought to bar the disclosure of the video and audio from her interview of President Biden. There's no possible way executive privilege should bar the disclosure. The transcript's already been exposed. He had a clear agenda. He didn't want people to see the condition that President Biden was in, and that's not the role of the Attorney General. He lost the confidence of anyone who believed in his integrity, I would think, with that kind of move. And it's a shame that will be his legacy now.
And as I'm sure you saw in an interview this week, it's revealed that Joe Biden feels that Merrick Garland didn't move fast enough on the prosecution of Donald Trump to ensure Joe's reelection. If that isn't proof of political interference and calculations regarding the application of justice in our criminal justice system, I'm not sure what is. I said this the other day. Merrick Garland makes disgraced Attorney General John Mitchell look like St. Thomas Aquinas when it comes to his run as Attorney General. Many lawyers I know once thought highly of Garland, but his conduct as Attorney General has really brought disgrace upon him. Joe Biden, I think, has ruined this poor man's reputation. It's a job he never should have taken to begin with. Troy, a final question for our guest, David Schoen, because he's a busy man. He's got to get back to his law practice. Troy?
Absolutely. Appreciate the opportunity, Roger. Sir, I just have one more question here. I want to point this out to you. I was not set up on this question, just something that I was wondering. We've talked a little bit about the documents case, the idea that there is no law or provision that allows the appointment of these special counsels. So I think of Roger and so many others that had their lives destroyed by a special counsel, Mueller. And I wanted to ask you, sir, going back, would that technically discredit all of the charges and lives that were destroyed during the Mueller investigation? And how can we address that now that we've kind of been, the precedent has been set that these special counsels are completely illegal in the first place?
Yeah, well, it should have, but unfortunately there was a brief decision without much analysis, and in the D.C. Circuit at the time that rejected the argument that it was unconstitutional. The argument was never fully developed. In my view, it should have been raised in the President Trump D.C. case. There's a wonderful article that law professor Steve Calabrese wrote with a colleague. He's from Northwestern University, a colleague from Boston University, that really lays out this whole argument. And it did at the time. And it explained that time why the Mueller appointment was unconstitutional. It's a very clear issue. I think they're right on. The 11th Circuit might reverse Judge Cannon, and then it'll go up to the Supreme Court, and we'll see what the court says. I would bet that there are at least 4 to 5 justices who will think that the appointment is unconstitutional. It's simply a clear constitutional argument. It's not a matter of emotion or otherwise. It makes what Professor Calabrese has argued makes perfect sense.
Yeah, so to be very clear, Smith is appealing this order. And if he prevails at the circuit, it would go to the Supreme Court. I would think that the 2 men charged with him, regardless of what happens to the president, they too will pursue this course of action. Let me put it another way. If Jack Smith's appointment is deemed by the U.S. Supreme Court to be unconstitutional, would that not mean that Robert Mueller's appointment would be equally unconstitutional? Because I think the set of facts are almost identical. Neither one of them, under the Appropriations Clause or the Appointments Clause, eligible for these positions.
Yes, and Professor Calabrese certainly would make that argument that the two, if one is out, the other is out. Yeah, but I would assume that, Nauta and de Oliveira will continue to take this on and fight this battle. I think there may be, some kind of mootness question here. Jack Smith has resigned. I don't know if the office exists anymore. I don't know who's taking over the prosecution. There is someone from the Justice Department who stepped in to argue the appeal on this on this motion that was pending on stopping the report from going out. But we'll see what happens with that. But then if Jack Smith was out, then the entire indictment process was flawed and so on. So the case would have to be dismissed.
Well, it's meaningful to me because you see, if Robert Mueller's appointment was unconstitutional, then my convictions would have to be vacated. They would have been improperly brought, something my lawyers would be watching very carefully. All right, I want to thank David Schoen, a preeminent criminal defense lawyer, ably represented President Donald Trump in the Ukrainian impeachment, as well as the issues pertaining to January 6th. The most able lawyer I know. David, thank you so much for joining us today in the Stone Zone.
Thank you very much, guys. Thanks for having me. Always an honor.
All right, Troy, there you have it. Once again, at the Stone Zone, we bring you a newsmaker. If you missed David's incredible interview just the other day on Fox, I'm going to be putting that up on Rumble momentarily. But let's go into the political news. Before we do that, let me say again, because I'm flooded here with emails, you can get your very own Make America Italian Again hat. These were specially made. I must tell you, initially I just had 50 of them made up, and they sold out almost immediately when I posted the availability on social media, both on X and at Truth Social. I had to reorder almost immediately, but the hats are back in stock. So go to StoneZONE.com. That's StoneZONE.com. Go into the store and you can get your very own Make America Great Again cap. If you go immediately, maybe we can get it to you for the inauguration. If you place your order today, you can specify whether you want it signed, as this one is, or whether you don't want it signed. It is a heritage to my own Italian American personal heritage because, well, Stone is a name plucked out of thin air by a clerk at Ellis Island. My family name is Corvo, which means the crow in Italian, also named after the town in Sicily that my people are from. So get your Make America Italian Again hat at StoneZone.com in the store. All right, Troy, let's take it from there.
Well, Roger, we have a lot of political news to get to today, but I want to start with really some unbelievable news out of the Biden White House that's causing controversy, something we talked about on the show quite a bit. Biden is reportedly considering pardons for former Representative Liz Cheney, Representative Benny Thompson, and Adam Kinzinger, members of the January 6th committee, because they're stating that they're basically under threat with Trump taking office. We see the headline there. We also have a clip of White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre talking about this yesterday at the briefing. Let's roll this, and then when we come back, Roger, let's get your thoughts on what's going on here. Are they trying to cover this up, or is this just posturing? What's going on?
In his interview with the USA Today earlier this week, the president talked a bit about preemptive pardons, saying that they are still potentially on the table. Can you speak a little bit about the scope that he is considering when it comes to that? And if he's any closer to
So we have been saying that the president will have more to say, more to announce on pardons and commutations. So that is, we have 10 days to go. So certainly that will be very soon that we'll make those announcements. I'm not going to get into the scope. I'm not going to get ahead of the president, but we will be making some more additional announcements on pardons and commutations before the end of his term.
So you see her dodging the question. Look, I think there's a lot of puckered keisters in D.C. and around the country today. Liz Cheney's got several problems. First of all, given the fact that she circumvented a represented party, a witness, went around the Cassidy Hutchinson, the witness, to coach her on perjury, and went around her lawyer, Stephen Passantino, she should be disbarred from that. Let me go one step forward. She will be disbarred from that. She knows that that's inappropriate activity. She's also clearly guilty of the destruction of evidence and several other crimes. Suborning, perjury comes to mind as others. Yes, you see, Liz we're not going to have a one-tier justice system. People like you and your war criminal father, a man who made millions of dollars by lying this country into war against Iraq. He told us falsely that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction. He didn't. He told us and he forced Colin Powell, then our national security advisor, to testify for the UN, claiming falsely that Iraq had obtained yellow cake uranium for the manufacture of nuclear devices. Another lie. And then he claimed, this is the most outrageous of all, that Iraq was somehow involved in the attack on America on 9/11, which of course they have no connection to that whatsoever. The Saudis, perhaps, that information is still being suppressed from the American people, but not Iraq. So the daughter of a war criminal, who is herself a war criminal, is seeking a pardon because she knows she's ripe for prosecution because she broke the law. Equally true of Benny Thompson. Good thing for Benny, there's no IQ requirement to be a member of Congress. Benny had filed a civil lawsuit accusing Donald Trump of being responsible for violence at the Capitol. So how could he possibly chair what is supposed to be an unbiased inquiry into what happened on January 6th? Benny's also responsible for the destruction of evidence and all of the records. If they did nothing wrong, Troy, why would you destroy the records? I can tell you why. Because it will show that they coached witnesses. It will show that they suppressed certain witnesses. It will show that they manipulated both audio and video with the use of AI. I can tell you that the videos they showed of me have been completely manipulated. I've seen the originals. By the way, they're benign. This is a criminal conspiracy. Again, Speaker Johnson should appoint a committee to investigate the January 6th committee. If not, here's another idea. Matt Gaetz is an attorney. Pam Bondi can appoint Matt as a special counsel to focus on the January 6th committee investigation. He's on a first name basis with all of those members. And for those who argue, well, wait a minute, she can't do that. That would require Senate confirmation. No. You argued that special counsels like Jack Smith and Robert Mueller don't require such a role. So I think that'd be something Matt Gaetz would be really good at. If you want to know who's got legal trouble coming their way, just look at who Joe Biden's giving medals to. That'll give you the tip off of the list of perps. But we have to hope that there is going to be a rebalancing of the scales of justice here, and that people who were involved in egregious crimes against the country and against Donald Trump and against his supporters are held accountable.
Well, Roger, there's another person out there that is really looking like he's a little bit frightened about the prospect of being held accountable for a lot of the things that he's done. And he was the chief architect, really, of your prosecution. You alluded to this video earlier in the show. We want to play it for everybody so that they can see. Andrew Weissman unbelievably claiming that when Trump takes office, that the United States will dissolve into a dystopian, lawless world. You know, Roger, one of the most amazing things I read on Andrew Weissman and the Enron case was the fact that he released a list of 114 or so unindicted co-conspirators. Now, these weren't people that were charged with any crime. They were people that Andrew Weissman had encountered throughout his investigation. And because of this list, these people who were never charged with any crime had their lives destroyed. People like office workers, people like accountants, people like security guards, people that simply worked in the apparatus in which the corruption took place, people that necessarily didn't take place in it, but were considered unindicted co-conspirators, had their lives destroyed by Andrew Weissman long before he even led the persecution of youth. So let's roll this and then get your thoughts on Weissman's panic going into this next Trump administration.
I just want to start with the big picture here, Andrew. I mean, we talked about this last week, but it feels a little bit like the end of a chapter on these legal cases. And maybe that this could incentivize this kind of behavior without consequences in the future? I mean, there's only one Trump, but just in general. But how are you thinking about this moment?
Well, if you think about the idea that there could be pardons for the people who were involved in January 6th, it gets to be a pretty dystopian world, that when you think that somebody could be committing crimes as outrageous and horrendous as not just attacking police officers, but really attacking our democracy and doing it at the behest of the president, but would face no criminal consequences, at least federally, because they're either the Department of Justice under Trump 2.0 will not go after them, or they could be pardoned for prior crimes or future crimes that they commit at his behest. So we really could be entering a lawless world. It remains to be seen. It's going to be a real challenge for those people in the Department of Justice when you have a convicted felon as the president. But it remains to be seen. But it is a scary prospect, especially when you're thinking about the January 6th defendants.
You know, the great thing about Andrew Weissmann is everything he says is the absolute reverse of the truth. First of all, Andrew Weissmann got his start as a federal prosecutor in Brooklyn, lying under oath to cover up at least 14 mob murders. I've begun interviewing members of those families for a documentary. Secondarily, his conduct of the Enron case. Andrew, try to get this through your head. You were reversed unanimously by the Supreme Court. You destroyed both Enron and Arthur Anderson. This is not the gold standard of prosecutions. You were a corrupt prosecutor. You destroyed evidence, the cell phone records of the Mueller investigators at the time they were under subpoena by special counsel of John Durham. So you seem to think that the law doesn't apply to you. Now, I know some guys, excellent criminal defense attorneys, who have put together a comprehensive case against you that they're prepared to present to a grand jury in whatever jurisdiction. So you're breaking the law habitually, which you have done throughout your career. In fact, by leaking the search warrant and the arrest warrant for me on the morning of January 25th, that's also a felony. Justice coming your way. You have never stood for the rule of law. You and your activities are the exact antithesis. You may be the single most corrupted federal prosecutor in history. There's a book out that I think it's called Pitbull, the most corrupt prosecutor in U.S. history. There's a companion documentary in the works. You can see why he's sweating. You destroyed lives. You tried to destroy my life. You tried to destroy Donald Trump's life. Now, my friend, all of your crimes will be exposed. All of your crimes. By the way, congratulations on buying that multi-million-dollar condo in New York City, not to mention the multi-million-dollar condo next door where you just house your wine collection. No, I must tell you, I think justice is coming for Mr. Weissmann, and he looks a little nervous to me there. He looks a bit peaked, don't you think?
Well, Roger, it's interesting. He's talking about, when he's talking about January 6th in particular, he's talking about locking up really innocent people who we've seen the videos, Capitol Police opening the doors, letting people in. You're talking about a lot of innocent bystanders, most of them. And he has, encouraged people at the DOJ, and he's really been on MSNBC saying, prosecute these people, lock them up. So fathers, mothers, grandmothers, grandfathers, people, that are loving, patriotic Americans, Roger, like we saw in the film, the shocking Dinesh D'Souza film that was released just a few years ago that talked about this. It's regular people that have been under the boot of Andrew Weissmann for years, and to see him sitting in his multi-million-dollar apartment with a turtleneck on, acting like he's the victim, while it's normal Americans are rotting in these jail cells. We just last week had Joseph McBride on, who's represented 25 at least of these people, and has talked about the abuses they've gone under. They've been poisoned, they've been beaten, and while that's going on, Andrew Weissmann has an apartment for his wine collection and is sitting there in a turtleneck. You juxtapose the two, it's really unbelievable. For him to say anything is lawless, there's no prosecutor who's acted more lawless throughout his entire career than Andrew Weissman. And we have people, it's not just you and I that say that, Roger, people that are much more educated than we are, people who are legal scholars believe that. And, you know, we're just talking about this general sense in Washington of panic. Another individual that was part of the J6 committee, he's now moved on up to the Senate. Roger's name's Adam Schiff, but he has been making the rounds, the media rounds. And I wanted to highlight this because we have a couple headlines. The reservoirs, we're now learning that in California, the reservoirs around Los Angeles were barren heading into this the wildfires that we've seen, and they've burned homes and whatnot. But these reservoirs were empty. We have the headlines from LA, the LA Times, that say that California is now investigating why they were offline. Why were the reservoirs dry? But Adam Schiff claims on ABC that the reservoirs weren't dry. In fact, so the LA Times, which is no right-wing propaganda outlet, actually far from it, says that the reservoirs are dry. California is actually investigating why they were dry. Yet Adam Schiff lies through his teeth and says they weren't dry. Let's roll this and get your thoughts on his cover up here. Really, this guy's been, you know, running on for a long time, Roger. When is he going to be cut down? When is Adam Schiff going to face justice for all of his crimes? Let's roll this.
To your understanding, why did some of those, or so many of those fire hydrants simply run dry? Was there something to do with that 117 million gallon reservoir in the Palisades that was out of operation? What's your understanding? What's your initial read on this?
Well, my initial take, and I certainly want a full review of this so that I can form a more complete understanding of the matter. But my initial understanding is the reservoirs that the Palisades were drawing on, these 3 million gallon reservoirs, were full at the initiation of these fires. But they're intended, frankly, they have the capacity to put out homes that maybe house multiple houses, not if the whole town is up in flames, and most particularly not if the winds are so strong that aircraft can't fly. And this was the problem in the very beginning. The winds were hurricane force, up to 100 miles an hour winds. You can't fly in that, and you depend on being able to do water drops to put down those kind of flames. And I have to think there are probably hundreds of towns in California, thousands and thousands across the country that are in equally the same position, that if they had 100-mile-an-hour winds and a lot of dry fuel, they wouldn't have any more water than this community did. We also...
Well, once again, this is pretty obvious. You can always tell when Adam Schiff is lying because his lips are moving. Now, last week, the Department of Justice, the Biden Department of Justice Inspector General released a report that said that Adam Schiff and his cohort Eric Swalwell leaked classified documents in violation of the law. Now, that's a first-time nonviolent process crime. So why shouldn't 29 FBI agents swarm his home and arrest him? And why should he not be charged for that? He was involved in charging me with far less. I predict to you to this: Adam Schiff will not serve an entire term in the U.S. Senate. He will begin serving a term in a federal penitentiary before it's all over. He cheated to get elected senator of California, funneling money to Republican Steve Garvey, because under their system, all candidates of both parties run in a one unified primary, and the two top voters then run off regardless of party. Adam Schiff couldn't have beaten another progressive Democrat because he's universally hated by virtually anyone who's ever met him in the political game. So he needed to run against a Republican to begin to win. Ethics complaints will have to be filed against him in the Senate almost immediately. But in all honesty, I'm calling on Pam Bondi. If I was prosecuted for allegedly making misstatements to the House Intelligence Committee over matters that were immaterial, then Adam Schiff and Eric Swalwell must be prosecuted for the leaking of classified documents to the media, which is a felony, and for which the FBI has proof. Troy, I got to go here. I'm going to let you finish the show, but thank you for joining us today in the Stone Zone. I'm going to turn over the official proceedings to my colleague, Troy Smith, to close the show.
Thank you, Roger. Always an honor. And folks, it's hard to follow the great Roger Stone, but we do have one more video that I want to play for you guys. Really unbelievable stuff. This is Michael Cohen on air begging on MSNBC for a pardon, because now it's all come to light, and this train of people who have been lying for years about Donald Trump are now begging for a pardon. I think it's pretty indicative of what they've done. I mean, they wouldn't be asking for a pardon if they did anything that they did something that they thought was legal. It seems to me that there was some illegal conduct, a coordination, perhaps a conspiracy, or a coordinated effort to take down Donald Trump. And these people are scared that that's going to be exposed, not just in the court of public opinion, but perhaps in a court of law. Let's roll Michael Cohen.
Regarding the pardon, yeah, I put in the application for a presidential pardon because I believe that Joe Biden has the same responsibility to me that he had to his own son. And I would expect that the same exact pardon that he gave his son has to go to me and to anybody else that's on that enemies list, whether they want it or not. Because I assure you, solitary confinement where I did 51 days sucks.
Michael Cohen, I believe wholeheartedly that the solitary confinement was just a terrible experience for you. And I think your point about the enemies, the proverbial enemies list, right, is a good one. I wonder, have you heard anything back from the administration? It is my understanding that two things. The administration, one, is not going to give a pardon to anybody that doesn't want one. So folks who have prominently gone out and said, I do not want a pardon, the president is not going to issue a pardon to people that don't want one. But two,
they'll change their mind when they're sitting behind closed doors. That I can assure you, they're going to kick themselves in the backside for that one.
I think hindsight will always be 20/20. I guess my question is, have you heard from the Biden administration? And I am struck by your comparing yourself and Hunter Biden. And I wonder if, well, I'm going to just tell you, Michael Cohen, we're on national TV, we have a conversation. I don't necessarily think that's your best way to go get a pardon. I mean, Hunter Biden is the president's last surviving son. But your other point, why I do think is a strong one.
I'm somebody's son also, by the way.
Agreed. You are somebody's son. But, I mean, to be very clear, you're not the president's son.
Well, folks, there you have it. And I will say, seeing Michael Cohen, that's a sick individual. You see the way that he is kind of stammering around, and the emotion in his voice. He's unable to control his emotions. I pray for him. I really do, because that's an unstable individual, and may God deliver him. I mean, truly, it's sad to see somebody unravel in public like that. And I hope that it gets the help that he needs, because, probably was an upstanding guy at some point, although I think a lot of the things revealed about him say otherwise. So God bless you, Michael Cohen. I hope you get the help that you need. People, if you want to follow the show, you want to see us here on the Stone Zone every day. Roger and I, and also co-host Mark Vargas I'm doing my own show. So go ahead and follow us at rumble.com/Roger Stone. Give us a follow. So many people have done that, and we really appreciate you for it. Leave us a like, leave us a comment, tell us how you like the show. And we will be back tomorrow with another great episode. I'm Troy Smith signing off. For the great Roger Stone and myself, we will see you tomorrow. God bless.
A man who's gone through hell, but he's kept going, and he's smart, and he's strong, and people love him. Not everybody, but people love him and respect him. Roger Stone. Where's Roger Stone?